Speak. Oh, I'm just licking my dick. What's up with you? I was actually just rewatching Go, which is one of the best movies from the late 1990s.
Which for many years, whenever asked, I tell people that this was my favourite film, and I'd be met with an entirely blank face, followed by a, I've never heard of it. Beyond people I'd personally introduced to the film or my best friend, who I watched it with at the time of release, I'd never met a single other person who'd seen it in real life, and it was a massive shock to find out that this was in fact a huge critical and somewhat commercial success. Although it shouldn't really be that much of a surprise because this film was brilliant when I was 17, and it's still brilliant now I'm in my 40s.
I've titled this video something like The Pulp Fiction of the Dawson's Creek Generation, and that is because this was one of the many Pulp Fiction alikes that came out in the mid to late 90s after that film's success, having that same quippy energy, wit and non-linear intertwined story, but starring an ensemble cast of up-and-coming actors who were mainly in their early 20s, which made it way more relevant to me because I was a similar age to the in-film characters and was starting to dip my toes into that world of partying and girls, meaning it just hit right and was much more endlessly quotable and rewatchable to me and my friends than Pulp Fiction, a film we were 11 when that came out. Which brings me to the narrative, which uses the same split-style story in Pulp Fiction, this time told from the perspective of 3 different characters, each taking around a third of the 102-minute runtime and giving us a little bit more information about the overall narrative with every retelling. It revolves around an ensemble cast of diverse characters who all basically want to score drugs, get laid and pay rent. First up is Ronna, played by Sarah Polley, a flat, broke, checkout girl who just really doesn't want to be ho-ho homeless on Christmas, who comes off a 14-hour shift only to be offered another one by her work colleague Simon, more on him later, which she reluctantly agrees to because he pays her up front and she needs to pay rent by tomorrow or get evicted. I know America is a dystopian capitalist hellscape, but do they really evict people on Christmas Day? Even for them, this seems extreme. Let me know in the comments. Whilst covering his shift, she's approached by a couple of guys who want to buy ecstasy. More on them later too. Again through desperation, she agrees to sell them drugs, as she sees it as an easy way to earn some quick cash. Her plan is simple. Visit Todd Gaines, who is Simon's dealer, buy drugs at $10 and sell them for $20 to the couple. Of course the plan goes about as well as you would imagine it would. Todd is a man who does not like giving favours, apparently enjoys licking his own dick, and is very much suspicious when a total nobody asks him for 20 pills of ecstasy, which is the magic number when that little deal goes from mere intent to supply to trafficking. Sadly for Ronna, he also wants $15 for each tab. Apparently inflation was a bitch, even in 1999. Of course the couple from before are actually working for the cops, meaning Ronna flushes the drugs and tries to trick Todd by giving him aspirin in return for her friend Claire's return, who is a very young looking Katie Holmes, who she'd left with Todd as collateral due to her lack of cash to completely pay for the pills. She then goes on to the rave the couple were allegedly going to attend to sell more fake ecstasy so she can make rent. I said this film was incredibly relevant to me when I originally saw this in '99, and the scene where she sells fake drugs to a bunch of teens who then pretend to be tripping was incredibly hilarious, as not long before seeing this, a friend of mine had in fact sold a bag of powdered sugar to someone and told them it was coke, and then watched them trip balls on it because he knew they were full of shit when they'd bragged about regularly taking it. Todd, not being an idiot, instantly realises her little ruse, tracks her down, and is just about to maybe kill her when she gets hit by a car and left in a ditch for dead. Thus ends Ronna's little story. The film was actually originally envisaged as a short film by the writer John August with just Ronna's story, but when people inquired about what happened with Simon and the young couple, he wrote 2 more short stories and intertwined them to make one larger narrative, thus explaining the need for a Pulp Fiction-like plot device. Simon's story is up next. A loud-mouthed, obnoxious Brit, the kind of person if you were British and my age, you 100% have met this character.
And if you haven't, you're either a Simon, a dullard, or a liar. His story is perfectly summed up by his friend in the car right at the end of it all.
You stole a car, shot a bouncer, and had sex with 2 women?
You had sex with 2 women?
This little back and forth also perfectly highlights one of the best things about this film, and that's the dialogue, which is quick, it's witty, and it's endlessly quotable when you were 17. You have Ronna just deadpan destroying a customer and her supermarket job right at the beginning.
Don't think you're something you're not. I used to have your job. Look how far it got you.
She also deadpans the cop.
Who the fuck are you, Monty Hall?
Every single line that Todd utters deserves to be in this part of the video. And for brevity's sake, this one will do, because it highlights the very many little callbacks this movie has to prior conversations.
I need a favor.
Wow, I didn't know we were such good friends, Ronna. Because if we were, you would know I give head before I give favors, and I didn't give my best friends head. I just gave you a favor.
Here, I thought you just gave me head.
But one of my favourite lines of all time in any film ever has got to be when Simon says this to a small child.
What are you doing?
Raping small children.
Even as someone in my 40s who has worked in education for well over a decade, I still laughed out loud for ages at this during my rewatch for this video. In fact, for years, whenever any of me and my friends asked each other, "What are you doing?" there were only 2 acceptable answers. Licking your own dick or raping small children. We were young and not very bright, what can I say? Which brings us to the last act and final branching path of the story, this time from the perspective of 2 gay soap opera actors and would-be ecstasy buyers, Adam and Zack, played by Jay Mohr and Scott Wolf, who are being forced by a very strange cop to stitch up Simon as they got busted for possession. In return, he will make their charges disappear. Of course, Simon is in Vegas, so they instead trap Ronna. That all goes terribly wrong, as we know from her section of the film, so they end up going to the cop's house, where he tries to get them involved in an MLM scheme. So in pure disgust, they go to a rave and get epically drunk, cut the hair of Jimmy from makeup in revenge for him sleeping with both of them, and then run over Ronna, before realising they were still wired up from the attempted drug bust, so in fear go back to try and dispose of the body. Luckily for her, she's still alive, so they just dump her on the hood of a car and flee instead after they see she gets help from other rave goers. Their story is the least interesting of the 3 for me, being mainly about their relationship. Simon's is obviously the best, having the most action and giant honking titties, being a kind of proto-Hangover but better written and funnier if you ask me. Ronna's story is the glue that holds it all together, with the overarching story really being about her trying to pay rent and how chance encounters and decisions can send people's lives barreling in very random directions. But we haven't quite finished yet, because Katie Holmes' character Claire bumps into Todd, ends up back at his, is about to have sex with him, and right before Katie Holmes gets naked, 2 gangsters from Vegas chasing Simon turn up and threaten to murder him. A situation Todd is just fine with, Claire less so. Simon turns up and agrees to get shot in the arm, pleasing everyone except Claire again. Wrapping up Simon and Todd's stories. Ronna wakes up in the hospital, limps into work, then realises she left Manny, her friend, tripping balls behind a dumpster, goes back to find him with Claire, and they all drive off into the sunset at the end. The story is fast-paced, energetic, and hilariously funny, and never at any stage remotely boring. It has a whole bunch of twists and turns, and is basically a One Crazy Night type flick that I have and will continue to just rewatch endlessly. Although I think this film is often compared to Pulp Fiction, even by me in this very video, the reason this works, unlike a lot of the films that copied that film's style, is because it wasn't designed as a Pulp Fiction ripoff. It just happened to have the split narrative due to the short story origins of the script being expanded, and then the script probably being picked up due to it having that in common with Pulp Fiction, rather than it being an out-and-out ripoff by design. It's also a script that is full of great characters, being brought to life by the stacked cast of up-and-coming actors, who I think bar one person making a very first appearance in a film, do the best work of their career, that I've seen anyway.
Sarah Polley was probably the biggest star from the main cast at the time, along with Katie Holmes, who the year prior had started to appear in Dawson's Creek as Joey. Sarah Polley especially is excellent as the deadpan linchpin of the plot, Ronna, both highly relatable and yet funny in just how she deadpans her way through all of these incredibly shitty situations. Polley has gone on to have a very successful career, transitioning into directing and writing, and actually won an Oscar for that in 2022. Katie Holmes doesn't appear as much as you'd imagine she would, but whenever she does, she's, Katie Holmes in 1999, so very much the girl next door cute, whose career has seemingly derailed since she married and later divorced the Mad Hatter of Hollywood, Tom Cruise. Desmond Askew as Simon was an actor I was aware of from his various stints on British shows, such as Grange Hill, and he plays the character of Simon brilliantly. A character who, in my opinion, is an absolutely obnoxious bell end, but I love him for it. I can't say I've ever seen Desmond in anything else ever since, which is a shame, but he seems to have done a fair amount of voice work for video games. Taye Diggs, Breckin Meyer, and James Duval have supporting roles as his friends, and the four of them combined have believable best friend chemistry that makes their section of the film even better. Timothy Olyphant as Todd the drug dealer is awesome in everything. Yes, even the Hitman movie, Sui, here is no different. He has the best lines and spends most of his screen time with no shirt on, or just looking really cool, and he's probably one of the best depictions of a drug dealer you are ever gonna see. Definitely one of the most quotable. Jay Mohr and Scott Wolf as the gay couple also have fantastic chemistry, and carry what is, as I previously said, probably the weakest section of the film for me with their performances. The only downside to the cast is Melissa McCarthy appears for all of a minute in her first ever movie appearance, and she's a shit as always. Beyond all that, you have the soundtrack, editing and cinematography that all combine to just make the action and narrative seem even more fast-paced and quippy than it would otherwise, with the soundtrack being a definite standout with songs that are not only absolute bangers, but actually do complement the on-screen action. Doug Liman, the director, had started his own career with his previous film 1996's Swingers, a movie that has a very similar style and energy to it. Sadly, this film didn't catapult anyone to superstardom, but everyone involved deservedly went on to have decent enough careers except Melissa McCarthy, whose continued existence in Hollywood baffles me. It's also a movie set at Christmas and has a weird theme based around the letter X running throughout, so keep your eye out for that one. There's a whole bunch of quotes, names and background X's for you to spot. Oh, and one last thing I need to talk about, the awful poster this film has. It's a fast-paced, witty crime comedy, and this is what they went with for the poster. It screams a boring teen drama to me, something this film is definitely not. Go is a movie I've loved since its release, and surprisingly still think is as brilliant as it ever was, because most films I thought were brilliant when I was 17 haven't quite held up as well as this has, because this has held up really well, and it's just as watchable now as it was then. I obviously highly recommend you track this down and watch it because it is just great fun. If you enjoyed that, then don't forget to like, comment and subscribe,